And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
All right, we're back. Cover 1, the Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown. With me today, Dan Schneier of the CBSSports.com. Dan, my man, how we doing?
What's going on, Russell? Happy to be here. Excited to talk some draft with you.
Yeah, for sure. You are also one of the voices on Big Blue Banter, the Giants podcast, which, of course, you guys can find on Apple Podcasts. Be sure to drop Dan a follow on Twitter at Dan Schneier NFL. That's SCHNEIER. So smash that follow button for him. I hope I'm not butchering his last name. Dan, I'm not. Am I doing good?
You nailed it, actually, which is really a compliment and a testament to your pronunciation skills, because I still have some friends of 10, 15 years who still can't pronounce my name or spell it right.
Hey, stick around for the podcast long enough. I promise there's plenty of draft names that I butcher throughout the years. So it's a struggle for me for sure. But yeah, I appreciate Dan coming on. Hopefully everybody's staying safe out there, especially with everything that we've got going on. Keep washing them hands, as I say on every single show as of late. But yeah, we're talking Giants here. If you're new to the show, you're new to the Apple Podcast and everything else, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. But at the same time, if you go back, you've probably listened to me talk with Joe Goodberry, Jeff Risdon of the Lions, all kinds of good stuff. So Dan and I, we're going to talk Giants here. They own the 4th pick of the draft. Before we get into some of their needs, we want to break down briefly of what they did in free agency. They were pretty active. One of my favorite moves that they did was sign – I know it's not going to move the needle for some people, but Blake Martinez, I like the move of bringing him in. I'm a little concerned that by bringing him in, are they going to hesitate and shift away from Isaiah Simmons? But kind of give me the good, the bad, and the ugly breakdown of your opinion of the Giants' free agency.
Yeah, I think they did a pretty good job in free agency, which is tough to say considering the track record during the first 2 free agencies with Dave Gettleman, but I think he figured it out. Shorter term contracts, cap hits at the beginning of the contract, so they're not tied to it later in the contracts like they were in the past with Nate Solder and other contracts like that. And in addition to that, what they've done here is add my favorite signing of theirs, Kaiir from the Packers, actually another linebacker there, and we'll get into Martinez in a second. But Fackrell is a guy who I think was awesome on tape in 2018, really good in 2019, took a step forward in pass coverage, but just didn't play any snaps because the Packers went out and signed both Smiths in free agency, Za'Darius and Alden, and then they also not Alden Smith, Preston, and then they also went ahead and drafted Rashawn Gary in round 1, so the snaps just weren't there for him, but I think he'll thrive in Patrick Graham's defensive system with Giants. And then as for Blake Martinez, another one of their big moves, I think with Martinez, a lot is made about his struggles in pass coverage and can he do this, can he do that? But what he's being brought in to do is something the Giants haven't had over the past 2 years, and they thought they would get with Alec Ogletree, and that's somebody who can play the run when the run's coming right at him. Ogletree was really, really bad in run fits, and why do I think this signing has nothing to do with Simmons? Well, that would be my answer. I think he's being brought in to be a captain of the defense, Martinez, somebody who can shore up that inside run game. And then Simmons is a player who can play next to him and do different things for them. But we'll get to more of that later. Just to wrap up free agency, their final and their biggest move was to sign James Bradbury, boundary cornerback from the Panthers, who I really like because I think he's done it against some of the best receivers in the NFL 6 times a year with Mike Evans, Michael Thomas, and Julio Jones. And he's matched up, shadowed them. But I think it was a little bit of a miss because they did go hard after Byron Jones. And I have it on record that they were in the finalists with the Dolphins for Jones. But in the end, they just couldn't match that price because to sign Jones, they weren't going to have to match the Dolphins record setting and, market resetting contract they offered Jones. They were going to have to exceed it because Jones had the benefit, or Miami had the benefit of obviously having the, Florida State tax rules working on their side.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the one thing with competing with teams like the Jaguars and the Dolphins, constantly trying to get some of those, free agent signings is, them and their tax rules and laws down there. But for New York, I'm with you a little bit on the James Bradbury signing. I like it. I think it's, the price was a little high, but at the same time, I mean, this is a guy that is efficient. He's only 26 years of age. So if you can get a guy with some of that man coverage ability, even though he played a little bit more zone than man in Carolina, I think you get a guy with experience, and he's only missed just one game, I think, over the last 3 seasons, or maybe 2 games.
Yeah, and I think, like you're saying, the thing with Bradbury, the key is that they just felt so uncomfortable last season in those 3-by-1 looks where teams would have just a lone receiver on the boundary on the side, and they'd just be, DeAndre Baker would be out there, Janoris Jenkins would be out there for a little while. They tried to give Sam Beal a shot out there. It just wasn't working out, and so now they feel like they can do different things on defense because they're more comfortable leaving Bradbury on an island.
Yeah, and if Baker takes that step forward, you have Bradbury. And then obviously with 10 draft picks and a pretty good cornerback class, you would have to think that they could make a move there. So, I mean, with everything that they've done in free agency, what are some of their biggest needs going into next week with this draft on the horizon?
Yeah, Russell. So the best teams in the NFL use free agency to fill needs and the draft for value. But in the Giants specific situation, they had a lot of needs, too many needs for just one free agent period. So they're going to enter this draft with a lot of needs. They need offensive tackle help right there at that position. They have an aging Nate Solder who's only getting worse and will likely be cut next offseason when the dead cap hit comes down. They have a former UDFA who I really loved coming out and thought he should have been drafted, and who they like, who played some really good snaps for the Giants last year, but just didn't play enough. So it's a small sample size, and that's Nick Gates, former Big Ten guy, Nebraska offensive tackle, played really well there and just didn't get the credit. And then they just signed Cameron Fleming, who, had a nice run with the Patriots, started games on Super Bowl team, didn't play as consistently with the Cowboys, but has familiarity with the offensive system they're bringing in with Jason Garrett and with the offensive line coach they're bringing in with Mark Colombo, both coming from Dallas. So that's a huge need. Their the biggest need for me is still finding that safety that deep half safety they can trust in single high looks, because as they move forward with Patrick Graham as their defensive coordinator and not James Betcher, who was fired or who was let go, they're going to use more single high safety looks, and they're going to need a guy with range back there, and they certainly don't have it. And then, as we move forward, other key needs, offensive center, they cannot trust what they have there. Spencer Pulley is a below average or average player, and they don't have much else with John Jalapeno coming off a torn Achilles. And then lastly, of course, the same issue that's plagued the Giants forever. It's an off-ball linebacker with athleticism to hold up in coverage, to match up against big slots and tight ends and running backs out of the backfield. So those would be my 4 key needs for the Giants heading into the draft.
I love it. I love the thought of them attacking this draft, looking at offensive tackles. Even if they didn't do it in day one, I think that there's certainly a day 2 offensive tackle in there somewhere for them, whether that is, a Lucas Nyang or an Austin Jackson out of USC, if he's there. Certainly you bring up the single high safety look and really the off the ball linebacker type of guy. I mean, I don't know if you can necessarily do it all in one, but the guy that fits that at 4 would be Isaiah Simmons, obviously, just because he's an athletic unicorn of a freak type of player that does so many different things. He can play in a variety of roles. And as we circle to this 4th overall pick, I mean, is this the player that you think that they're going to take with this 4th pick?
It's not necessarily the player I think they're going to take anymore. I really think that I'm starting to lean toward. It's really hard for me to figure out what they're doing with this pick. I'll start by saying that it's the player I would take if they stay at 4. For me, Simmons grades out as the 2nd best player non-QB in this class for me, over Okudah, over even Derek Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Who obviously the Giants certainly can't afford to take another interior defensive lineman. But as far as what they're going to do, I really feel like they're going to prioritize developing Daniel Jones faster and not taking a chance that his development will go in an opposite direction. So with that in mind, I think they're going to really put a lot of thought and resources and time into trying to trade back with this pick, because I do believe they like the depth with those 4 tackles, and I'm not sure they have one guy they love there. So if they can trade back, acquire more assets to fill all the needs we just talked about, and then still get an offensive tackle who they trust to help protect Daniel Jones, I think that's where they're leaning right now.
It's crazy. We talk about so many times of how teams are kind of breaking the trend of what they've done in NFL draft history. You know, the Lions, they haven't drafted a corner since 1998 with Terry Fair. For the Giants, if they took Simmons, it would be the first time since, 83, 84 with Carl Banks, who came out of Michigan State as that first-round linebacker. They could do it again here with Isaiah Simmons, but as you are kind of hinting at, you think there's a potential trade back. Well, that'd be the first time for Dave Gettleman to trade back. And I have a hard time thinking he's going to do that because he sticks so true to his board. But you're probably right. I mean, I've very much with you here that I think that they have a significant value for an offensive tackle. The guy I circle at offensive tackle is constantly Tristan Wirfs for them just because of the versatility that he would provide for them. I love what he does in space. Obviously, he's a former wrestler. He's got, elite athletic ability. He tested really well at the combine, great overall strength. So that's the guy that I really like for the Giants. I think he's a great fit for them. I think also Andrew Thomas would be kind of that plug-and-play left tackle for them. Great in the run game, really good length. He had over 36-inch arms at the combine. So those would be two guys. But if they were to move back, is there a team that you think would be willing to move up? I mean, I don't know if there's, necessarily the Chargers or even Miami to move up a spot. But, I mean, how far back would you be okay with them moving?
Yeah, so that's the problem with the trade down scenario. It's trying to find who that trade partner would be, because we know Gettleman obviously has never traded back in his career, and it goes against pretty much his principles as general manager. But I do think that, these past 2 years have been humbling for him, and he's even made comments about potentially, having different voices. And obviously now Joe Judge comes in with the Patriots background, and that may be one major voice that really is in his ear. Like, listen, we like these tackles pretty similarly. What is the point of not trading back? And there is no point if they like them similarly. So with that said, you look at the Chargers potentially if they're trying to move up for Herbert. You look at the Raiders potentially, I think, are a sleeper to try to move up for a quarterback. I really am not sold that they wouldn't trade up for a quarterback, trade Derek Carr in the draft, and keep Mariota and that rookie. That I'm not sold. And then a key one for me would be, and this would just be a question of, would they be willing to move back this far? And that would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are going to be hell-bent on trying to secure one of these 4 OTs for Brady. But, I can only see them moving that far up if they have one OT in mind that they think is light years ahead of the others. And for me, at least for the Giants speaking, I don't have one OT definitely light years ahead of the others. My OT one is Jedrek Wills. I think that he's the smoothest in pass protection by far not including Andrew Thomas. But for me, Thomas worries me a lot because he has so few. I really think he's a bit hidden by that system in Georgia. It's very play action heavy system. And I think that makes it a lot easier for him there. But as far as what I've seen, I think Wills would be the one who can contribute immediately for Daniel Jones. It's in 2020, week 1 through week 16, the fewest bad tape games at right tackle, because Nate Solder's not going to be able to kick over. So really, if they're looking for a day one starter, it's going to be on the right side. And for me, it would be Wills. But yeah, if you're thinking about trading back, it's more so about finding the right team, I think, because I don't think they're going to go too far back.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, there's so many possibilities, obviously. The quarterback-needy teams like the Dolphins and the Chargers. Obviously, who knows what Arizona's thinking. I mean, obviously, they've made some trades already in the offseason. Right. Could they be, they're an offensive tackle-needy team. Do they have a player they really love? I think they would be a great fit for Jedrek Wills. Would they want to move up to get him? Obviously, you mentioned Tampa Bay. So there's going to be a lot of interesting moves. Obviously, there'll be some draft capital. And if you're a Giants fan, they already have 10 picks in this draft. You would love to see them go out and get that, extra draft capital for this draft. And essentially at this point, we kind of summarized it to an offensive tackle, whichever one that is. A linebacker like Isaiah Simmons is certainly there. Is there another position in the first round that you might think they would consider? Is a cornerback position, or even moving down and being that team to take the first safety? Is that a little too rich for you, like a Grant Delpit or an Xavier McKinney? Is that too rich?
Yeah, I think they can get too cute, and those would be scenarios where they do get too cute. I think that the key to their trade down scenario would be making sure they still land one of those 4 OTs. I really think if it's not Simmons or one of those OTs, and I could be sold on Okudah just because he's we really don't need him. He's the best player available, and I don't think they're going corners in back-to-back first rounds anyway, so it's not really a possibility. But, I think they could get too cute, and getting too cute would be drafting Derek Brown because they think he's the best player on the board overall, and they're not worried about need. But even though they've just poured asset after asset after asset into the interior defensive line, which is questionable to begin with, or, even worse for me almost would be drafting a receiver. In any class, I don't like drafting a receiver in round one, personally. I think their impact on wins and losses is very overrated, and they're oftentimes really hit or miss when it comes to their presence in the locker room, especially, and chemistry with their team on and off the field, depending on how things are going in that passing game. But especially in this class, Russell, where there's going to be unbelievable value picks at the wide receiver position literally every round. Round two, best player on the Giants board, probably a receiver. Round three, the best player on the Giants board, and so on and so forth. So for me, yeah, they could get too cute, and that would be an example of them getting too cute.
Yeah, I mean, in a deep wide receiver class, it'd be nice to get one of those alphas like a CeeDee Lamb or a Jerry Jeudy, but at the same time, if you can get Michael Pittman in round two or a Tyler Johnson in rounds 4 or 5, I mean, just roll the dice and go for that, because you can get some serious value and other needs as well in this draft. So, I mean, obviously trading back is an option. Staying put, getting the player that fits your board is obviously something we discussed. But is there a possibility, and I think that there is, certainly with Gettleman, that they move from that second round pick, move back into the first round and potentially go after that need or that value? And it could be a wide receiver. Maybe they love a guy like a Denzel Mims, or again, we mentioned offensive tackle. Maybe there's an offensive tackle like, an Austin Jackson or a Josh Jones that they really like, and they feel like they need to move back into the first round to get them. Do you think there's a possibility that that's something they do, move back into this first round?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, we saw it last year with DeAndre Baker. Gettleman made comments about how he believes there's inherent, kind of hidden value in trading back into the first, because it gives you that fifth-year rookie option where you have to pay the guy. And he even said in the past, he tried to do it when Will Hernandez was on the board. He stayed patient, and he drafted Hernandez anyway at 34 overall at the beginning of the second round of that draft, but he was close to trading up. So I think it's a possibility, but I do think it would be a massive mistake. Gettleman's already played way too fast and loose with the draft picks, trading number 68 overall, which to me, in this deep of a class with this many prospects, I think that will be there at 68 who could really fit needs that I really like and think are super awesome values. But yeah, he dealt that for an impending free agent in Leonard Williams last offseason during a losing season, and he still doesn't have that guy under contract. So at this point, without that pick and with no pick between 36 and 99, I just don't think it's something that they can feasibly do and find success in doing. So I would hope they don't, but I do think it's a possibility.
I agree. I think the thing, for me is I wrote a piece last week about 3 trade targets in this draft. I really like the idea of the Browns trading down from 10 to maybe 15. And I constantly circle to teams like Tennessee and Baltimore and Seattle as potential trade back candidates, or maybe even San Francisco, simply because they don't have a day 2 pick and they don't pick again until the 5th round. So I love the thought of the Giants moving up and getting one of their guys, at 29, 30, 31, whatever. But again, what's it going to cost you to get in there? And if it's, future assets of next year's draft, obviously it'll make you kind of second guess it, because Gettleman, like you said, has done it already for guys like Leonard Williams, and he's not even under contract. So it's very concerning, obviously, but at the same time, it's kind of the roll of the dice that Dave Gettleman's shown that he's willing to do, and he did it last year, like you said, with DeAndre Baker. So I like the thought of all of that, but obviously day 2 for me is the meat and potatoes of the draft, and I love day 2. It's obviously because we get more draft, we get more picks and everything else, but what are some options for the Giants on day 2, considering what you think they're going to do on day 1? What are some options that you think they'll do as far as players?
Yeah, there are just so many guys I love for them on day 2. We'll start with that pick 36 overall, their second round pick. So if they don't go offensive tackle and they go Isaiah Simmons, I love Lucas Niang. We've had a couple guests on our show talk about Niang and talk about how just awesome he was in 2018. Dominant tape. Like, he dominated the game against Ohio State with Chase Young and Bosa both on the field. And yet in 2019, the injuries started to play a factor and he took a step back. Those are the type of guys I see as just awesome values. I mean, there's inherent risk in taking these injured players, especially in this, punctuated offseason where we don't really have, as much where the teams may not have as much medical data to work with. But I just think the upside there is super high. Same thing goes for a guy like Ezra Cleveland, who was playing through a turf toe injury in 2019. A lot of the issues in Cleveland's game are just, strength at the point, at the point of attack. But if part of the reason was that he wasn't able to plant off that foot, and that's why he took a step back in 2019, well, then I see upside there too. I also just see if any of the off-ball guys, if Queen or Murray drop to that pick, even Gay I would consider at 36. It's just such a need for them. And then as we move forward and just working through all of the team's needs, it wouldn't be crazy to see them take Cesar Ruiz, the center out of Michigan, if he's there. It wouldn't be crazy, I don't think, and I would like the pick. I mean, I'd wait at center because there's guys I like more. There's guys I think fit the Giants better later, Matt Hennessy, but he may have to come off 36. I think Tyler Biadasz at Wisconsin is going to be a total steal because another guy who was awesome in 2018 and played injured in 2019, and now it's killing him because, the pre-draft process this year is just killing these injured guys. And then just lastly, I mean, they're going to have to sit there and seriously consider, in my opinion at least, taking someone like Ashton Davis or Winfield at 36 because they're not going to be there at 99, I don't think. And those guys fill the need of exactly what they need, that deep half safety they can trust in single high looks. And that's so hard to find in the NFL. It's not going to be easy. They haven't found it in years. They had one for a little bit in Kenny Phillips, but the injuries killed Kenny Phillips. Antrell Roll sort of played that role, but not really. So I think it's just such a valuable role to have in the NFL. Such a valuable player to have that can fill that role. So those are my guys at 36. When we get to 99, I think the best value on the board there is going to be a receiver if they want to take one. They don't need a receiver there. I'd rather wait even to 110 to go receiver, but I would not be opposed to them taking like a Tyler Johnson if he falls to the end of round 3, for example. And I could go over tons of receivers who I love in this draft class. I mean, there's endless guys there. And then there's also, the centers I mentioned could be there. Biadasz could be there at 99, and that would be something else to consider. And then there's tackles I like there too, that deep. I mean, Ben Barch is a guy I think you can work with. He could get better. Obviously, Sadiq Charles is somebody who has some upside as well there at that position. And then, if Akeem Davis Gaither is on the board there at 99, and I don't think he'll be either, but some mocks have him around there, I think that's a slam dunk pick. He's another one of these off-ball linebackers I think would help revolutionize and change really what the Giants have had at the second level for so many years.
For sure. I mean, and you can even throw a guy like Logan Wilson out of Wyoming into the mix. I mean, he tested really well. I don't know if he'll necessarily be there at 99 for them, but yeah, there's some pretty good linebackers in this class. I think it's actually a lot better than some people give it credit for. I mean, Joe Bocci would be like that perfect plug and play in the middle, but you do have Blake Martinez kind of for that role a little bit. But Bocci's so instinctive, very underrated in my personal opinion out of Michigan State, not trying to plug my own school or anything, but, very productive, very instinctive. He was a great interview. I had him last week on the show. So I'm very intrigued by him overall. But yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. I think 36 Winfield Jr. would be a home run. He's my top-ranked safety, so I love him. I love the range that he has. I love the ball skills, obviously. He's so productive, and he can make a play on the football, it seems like, at will any given time. So, I mean, he's 26th on my board. Him at 36, I think, would be a steal. I like the offensive tackles that you mentioned, and Lucas Nyang as well would be the guy that I really like for them just simply because I think you can plug and play him. I know he had the hip injury, but it's going to be very interesting with this draft for sure. Dan, I don't have anything else for you other than the fact that what do you think of Joe Judge as the head coach of this football team?
I like it. It's a high upside swing. It can go in multiple directions. I mean, I think that's obvious with a guy who has this little experience at head coach, but I've always been a big believer in hiring head coaches who don't run either side of the ball. I believe these are where you have your highest upside and usually your lowest floor, or your highest floor, I should say, when you're looking for new coaches. Because when you get a coach who's running both one side of the ball, like the Giants have had the past two coach chances, the past two tries, Shermer and McAdoo, oftentimes they simply can't do both, and one suffers more than the other. So a guy like Judge who's going to come in, not run either side of the ball, let Jason Garrett completely run the offense, let Patrick Graham completely run the defense, and he'll help Thomas McGahee on special teams. I'm sure he'll have a bigger role there. But have time to focus on the little things that make such a difference for these coaches who don't run either side of the ball in game.
Absolutely. I like it. I think it was a shocking move for sure. I think it definitely made people like myself scratch our heads a little bit and go, what are you doing? But I think you're right. It's a high upside swing for the fences, and I hope it pays off for the Giants. Dan, I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time and giving us all this insight. All great players, great breakdowns on everything. I know I plugged it earlier, but where can we find you on Twitter and what kind of content you're working on over the next week or so for the draft?
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I do appreciate it. And this was really fun. So the pleasure is all mine. If you guys want to follow some of my work, you can follow me and I'll pretty much post all of it on my Twitter account, Dan Schneier NFL. I think Russell broke it down earlier. This week, we got a lot coming up. Nick and I are really working hard on the Big Blue Banter Giants podcast. We're doling out content really once every day or two, but maybe once every 3 days. We're trying to do even more. We've had some really good guests on lately on the show. John Ledyard, formerly of the Draft Network, now of Pewter Report, Kyle Krabs of the Draft Network, Jordan Reed of the Draft Network, and then Ryan Wilson of CBS Sports draft expert. So a lot of good interviews to catch up on there that are pretty much evergreen going into draft week. And I'm actually publishing some content this week too, which is a rarity for me these days as I've moved into an editorial role since August, and I used to write thousands of words a day, but I'll be writing content on the Giants' perfect draft plan. I'll be writing content on breakout players for the Giants next season, so a lot of Giants stuff. I'm also doing a perfect draft plan for the Jets. I was assigned to that. Nice. It could be interesting for all the Jets fans who are listening on this podcast. So yeah, that's what you can find in the upcoming days.
Awesome, guys. Smash that follow button again at Dan Schneier NFL. Check out the Big Blue Banter podcast. That's right. It's with Nick Filato, my guy. Love Nick. You guys be sure, again, to find Big Blue Banter podcast on Apple Podcasts. Smash the follow button. You can find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Until next time, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.